just to stay on time, let's jump right in. And Peter, if you listened in, what we ask is that you briefly introduce yourself and then jump into your topic, and make sure that the audience has some takeaways that they can, pragmatically or actionably, take away and
Sure.
deploy from your presentation. And I'll just listen in, come back at the end with some questions if no one asks any. All right, Peter, it's
not a problem.
Floor is yours. So let's make sure you get your slides up.
Well, thank you, Len. So I'm Peter Heessels, Vice President of Business Development at JSS Medical Research. Actually, let me put on fantastic. So I've been at JSS for the last 2 years now. I've been in the industry in contract research for about 25, and before that in the pharma industry doing regulatory and clinical affairs. Have a little bit of experience in everything from preclinical chemistry and manufacturing all the way to phase 1 to 4. But I'd say the last 20 years of my career have really been focused on the phase 1 to 4 market and helping companies find solutions to their problems and be able to bring their assets forward to hopefully either sell it off or to get approval and to sell and market the product to patients and benefit the healthcare market. So let me get into my presentation. So I'd like to thank Precision Globe for offering me the opportunity to present today to the group and to give my, summary of the COVID's impact on clinical research. Just seeing how come okay, here we go. Sorry, it wasn't advancing. I'm certain that everyone would agree that it is not a question of whether every aspect of the economy, healthcare delivery, research, and every individual's work and personal life has been affected by COVID-19. I guess the question is to what degree and how to adapt to minimize the effect and keep moving everything forward. I first want to just sort of give an overview where we are today on COVID. While some companies have made great progress in vaccinating their populations, this is still a global pandemic, which is not going away anytime soon. As we can see here, COVID-19 has now killed over 3.2 million people worldwide. This sobering milestone comes just 15 months and 23 days after the first death reported in Wuhan on January 11th. The virus has spread to over 195 countries with more than 153 confirmed cases. The highest official case count is in the US, Brazil, France, Turkey, Russia, United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, and Germany. The confirmed cases in the US stands about 32 million today. And the US has recorded the highest number of fatalities, over 570,000 deaths. The trend in the deaths tends to decrease globally overall in most countries. However, there currently is some peaks in other countries such as India right now. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, I guess. Hopefully there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And to date, we've vaccinated over 1.13 billion people, or doses have been administered. Some have been doubly or fully vaccinated, and others are still waiting their second dose. China leads the number of COVID-19 vaccinations, while Gibraltar leads the number of vaccinations per 100,000 population and has the dubious honor to be the first country to reach herd immunity threshold. And Gibraltar and Israel lead the world in fully vaccinating the largest portion of their populations. Now, if we look at the last 2 weeks, there still has been an increase in the number of cases. So there's been 11.4 new cases announced in the last 14 days, which has also led to an additional 182,000 deaths. And then 8.8 million people have recovered. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but again, the pandemic is still going to be with us for some time. Both countries are currently in their third wave, with the highest number of cases seen in the latest wave. With the vaccination programs kicking in, it is possible to have an impact, as seen in the US, which is in the blue curve. And at the same time, India is hitting all-time records of new deaths and over 430 cases per day seen recently. So it's, again, some countries have a good handle on it and moving forward, and some still have some work to do. And then here, just another subset of countries, the UK also, which is one of the high level of countries with high vaccination rates. They vaccinate over 50% of their population, and 21% fully vaccinated. And if you can see here, they've done a very good job at decreasing the number of cases and corresponding deaths. Now, if we look at the pharma response to COVID-19, I'd say, the speed at which the pharmaceutical industry has responded to COVID is nothing short of breathtaking. In a very short period of time, they've compressed what normally takes 3 to 5 years into maybe a year. As you can see from the vaccine landscape here on the right, there's 4 approved vaccines already and distributed widely throughout the world, which would have been unheard of even just a few years ago. And there are many more in the pipeline. There's also a large pipeline of therapeutic candidates. There's been 9 approved so far in the world, or at least with emergency use applications. And there's, again, another large group of over 1,000 compounds in the process moving forward. This is also astounding is the number of studies which have started since the beginning of the pandemic. I don't think I've been in here for 30 years and doing research, and I've never seen the number of studies that have popped up pretty much every day. You can go on to clinicaltrial.gov and see a whole group of studies that have started up. And we're now at almost 5,000 studies between industry and investigator-sponsored trials, with 2,165 currently in the industry box. If I break it down at a more granular level, look at the number of trials in the U.S., we're almost at 1,000 trials, or 909 trials to date. India recently overtook China to reach 535, just surpassing China at 509. But as we can see, pretty much any country in the world, when the country started getting a lot of studies, everybody tried to reach out to other countries where there weren't many studies. So it went from not very many in some countries to completely busy now. So I would say if there's a patient out there, they want to sign you up on a clinical study. These are the list of the approved vaccinations and therapies. So far, there's been 12 approved vaccines around the world. There's various success in different countries, so it's a mixture of some countries having multiple vaccines, some only having one, but we are making great progress. And currently, there's also 7 therapeutic products as well, which have made it to approval so far. Then if we look at the promising therapies still in development, this year from Global Data is the top 11 development programs with multiple vaccines having shown impressive efficacy, notably for the reduction in the need for hospitalizations and mortality. The window for utility could be argued that it's being limited for COVID-19 therapeutics. However, due to the rise in the treatment-resistant variants, I don't think the jury is out there yet, so I think we're going to be living with COVID for a very long time. Now, if we look at vaccines, there's still 8 promising candidates here. There are also many smaller companies developing vaccines, which may take longer to develop due to limited resources and the need to raise financing, which slows down the progress. But certainly the big guys have done a good job, and especially if you look at Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and Astra, they were basically able to demonstrate efficacy in prevention of COVID-19 multiple vaccines in basically in a record time of almost just around a year. I don't think anyone could have guessed that would have happened, but thank God that it has. Now, if we also want to look at the impact on pharma, I don't think there's been any area of the value chain that is unaffected by COVID-19. For this, I'm just going to focus on the topics in red, which are really the areas that are impacting doing clinical research. But developers of COVID-19 interventions could thrive. The bulk of the industry is currently facing challenges with running trials and dealing with supply chain disruptions. I know personally at JSS, we've had several projects delayed due to availability of getting their vaccine or their therapeutic in a manufacturing suite and getting it released. And then logistics and supplies of APIs and intermediates, and also I would say on PPE and testing kits and vials and all aspects of the materials we need to run effective clinical trials is also impacted. And then on the end user side, the hospitals are really struggling with the supplies and resources needed to handle the large influx of patients with severe disease, whether it's COVID or non-COVID. And in the midterm, the healthcare providers will continue to struggle to provide adequate patient care as long as COVID-19 associated hospitalization rates are high. And I think we've all seen that, where they've taken the hospitals and converted some hospitals into COVID-19 hospitals. And meanwhile, if you had your cancer therapy or your cardiac therapy scheduled, then it was postponed. So, the real impact on the healthcare system is very significant. And for the foreseeable future, it's still going to be a problem in many different countries. The availability of a vaccine or therapeutic will significantly improve the public health and reduce stress on the healthcare system. So long-term impact will be very positive. And if you're the winner of those therapeutics, I think it'll be very good for your company as well. Now, if we look at the COVID impact has created a massive global effort centered around finding effective therapeutics and vaccines. And developing usually takes several years, but they've considered and they've compressed it into a very short period of time. But a survey was put out there and asking what value chain component listed in the previous slide would be most impacted. And most people still did select a disruption of clinical trials and supply chain, which I'd say they're pretty much on the mark. And basically, pharmaceutical companies are shifting strategies to focus on COVID-19 aspects. And if you're non-COVID-19, those programs have really taken a backseat to the clinical programs at many companies. And we've seen that as well in the mix of studies that have been awarded in the last year. Now, many the trial sites, again, have been disrupted by patients and still not available to participate on non-COVID trials. So there has been obviously a large spike in COVID trials, but if they're non-COVID trials, basically there's been a lot of disruption either due to delayed initiation of trials, enrollment suspension, or just slow enrollment. So the ones that have sort of hobbled along, they're still going along, but it has slowed down, which obviously brings up the cost to our sponsors. And for small biotech that have limited budgets, that is a problem. So it is an impact. If we look at the disrupted trial by therapeutic area, I'd say that, there's no area that's been unaffected. However, oncology and the central nervous system seems to take, I'd say, the lion's share of the trials that have been impacted by COVID. If we then look at the trial phase, again, I don't think there's been any phase that has been unaffected. However, maybe it's because of the number of studies in these areas, but phase 2 and phase 3 seems to have a larger proportion of the effect. And they also are multi-center trials, which draws upon a larger number of sites and countries, which can have a bigger impact than if, say, just at a phase 1 unit where you can control the actual patients and running of the study. Now, hopefully, there is some light at the tunnel. It did slow down initially. However, there have been some resumption in trial activities, especially, say, in the U.S., where, COVID has been, I wouldn't say beat, but it certainly has been beaten down somewhat. So studies now are ongoing and recruiting. There have been some completed trials. There's been 178 trials completed in the last year. And basically, some trials are ongoing and have completed enrollment or just ongoing. So it is getting back to more normal. Also, despite already being an essential strategic initiative, digital transformation has taken on a heightened performance in in COVID times. I don't know of anyone who was really using Microsoft Teams or all these collaboration tools pre-COVID and say 2019, but certainly I'd say we're probably all experts at running video conferences and running, sharing documents and files through Teams and really collaborating. There was a survey that was done by, again, Global Data, and they asked how much the COVID has transformed or sped up the digital transformation, and it ranged all the way from less than a year to 5 years, with 35% of the respondents saying that it has accelerated more than 5 years. And I would, personally, I would guess it's at least 3 to 5 years minimum, depending on the size of the company. So it's certainly had a big impact. Now, if we look at, obviously, COVID-19 has disrupted provision of healthcare, but it's also becoming increasingly dependent on technologies. And this survey was asking the industry which particular area would benefit most from patient monitoring tools. And telemedicine was taken from the survey, and said it was up 58% of the respondents think that telemedicine will benefit the most. And I would assume that most people on the call have probably, if you've had a doctor's appointment in the last year, has probably done it through a telemedicine portal. So it really is technology that has been pushed forward due to COVID. And I would say the remote patient monitoring has the vast potential to dominate the field of telemedicine, as it enables healthcare providers to get data-driven insights, deliver patient-centric treatments, and disease management approaches. And this slide here shows the demand and increase in services from healthcare providers that provide telemedicine platforms. And if you look at January 2020, the levels were, almost a blip compared to the impetus. It did increase significantly. I know it's decreased for some providers, but it still is, I'd say, a tenfold increase from the beginning of the pandemic. So moving forward, I'm pretty sure that this is not going anywhere. Then, if we look at the public perception of the pharma industry, we've definitely taken our black eyes when you look at like the opioid crisis, increasing drug costs, lack of transparency in clinical trials, and or just being seen as just rampant corporate greed. But I'd say COVID-19 has offered a great opportunity for the pharma industry to showcase, what we can do if we pull together and really, salvage the world. And, even if you look at, say, Pfizer, they're not taking a lot of profit on their vaccine. They didn't take any public money, and they're really trying to ramp up the production so they can meet as many and basically save as many people as possible. And then also, if you look here at another survey of the industry, looking at how optimistic are they at the growth of pharmaceuticals, and basically between 50 and 75% of the respondents think that they're very optimistic or optimistic. So there's only a small proportion of the people which have a negative view of the pharmaceutical industry moving forward. We look at JSS. We've done about 1,000 studies in the last 5 years in all therapeutic areas, or most therapeutic areas, and all phases. I'll just briefly go through this just to give you a little bit of feeling. So since we're talking about COVID, infectious disease, we've run 117 studies in the last 5 years in this therapeutic area, followed with 17 COVID studies. We've run studies in Canada, US, Latin America, India, and Europe. We've worked on 4 different vaccines, basically multiple studies in phase 1 and 2. Most of the protocols now are combined in multiple phases just to save on the regulatory timeline, so I kind of merged them all together. And then we've done phase 10, phase 2 and 3 studies as well. So we do have a lot of experience in seeing all the trials and tribulations that have happened. If we look at the challenges to COVID, I'd say early on, the biggest impact was on the financing side. There was a lot of financing coming from the governments for specific COVID programs, which is great for the industry. And if you were in that, subset of companies that the governments had enough connections to get the money, then that was fantastic. But other venture funds, capital funds were inundated with COVID requests, which slowed down the process, especially if you're a non-COVID or even the COVID. And then they were inundated with some opportunities that probably weren't thought out. And they weren't sure whether or not they were real or they had a big enough effect. So they just weed through all these opportunities really slowed things down. Again, we talked about the manufacturing constraints, capacity of getting the drugs manufactured, the vaccines manufactured has been a major constraint, and some clients have lost 3 to 6 months or more on their timelines due to just getting the materials, as well as you have to plan ahead moving forward because there are shortages of API, PPEs are in shortage, lab test supplies, you need to do PK or especially in the vaccine trials, and you need to do PSMBs. You need to get the tubes available, and those are also on back order. So, again, you need to plan effectively moving forward. On the regulatory side, countries, I'd say by and large, have expedited clinical trial applications or IND approvals. They were as quick as as quick as a week, and generally within 30 days. And I'd say the same for all the ethics approvals, which was fantastic. And that was even in countries which typically would take 6 to 12 months. So they really pulled out all stops to make sure that it was possible to get the drug into patients. But there was also some challenges in that some countries added what they called scientific evaluation committees. Unfortunately, these committees were not part of the government. They were investigators in the industry. They weren't necessarily familiar with the development process. They asked a lot of extra information, which was not typical, which took time for our sponsors to respond to, which led to many delays in obtaining the information. And in the worst case, even they couldn't get the approval in the country because they were asking for some data which wasn't realistic to send because it was a blinded trial that was ongoing. So it really can raise some roadblocks. Different agencies also can request different study criteria. We're finding is there's many protocol amendments. I'd say the typical COVID trial has 5 or 6 protocol amendments, which again is very administratively burdensome. Takes a lot of re-review at the sites and training and retraining, and then dealing with all the changes through the data management process. So it does add extra complexities to the trial. Plus, the constant changing rules and timelines as the volumes of studies exploded. Initially, the agencies were pretty good at responding, but even the FDA, they said, well, we'd review and approve things within 30 days or even 2 weeks was their target. But after they were, at their 900 study, they were probably falling back to, a delay of, 6 to 8 weeks or more to get it approved. So it does have an impact. Clinical execution challenges, constantly changing site availability. Some sites were converted to COVID-19 sites. So if you're running an oncology study, obviously that's a big challenge when you can no longer recruit patients and the physicians are now repurposed for other activities. Lots of canceled surgeries and procedures, which, obviously has an impact. And or sites were just overwhelmed by patients. So even if you were running a COVID study, it sounds like you want as many patients you can get. However, if the sites didn't have time to deal with all the challenges with, that are required for putting the data in the EC and managing the overhead of running a study, they just couldn't enroll the patients. So that also leads to its own problem. Constantly changing rules for travel and quarantine issues. Some countries allowed site-to-site or on-site visits even during peak periods. Others completely refused, so you had to go to online remote monitoring, which is great as a tool. It does save some time, certainly on the sponsor side, but it adds burden and time on the investigator sites. And some of them are starting to question and prefer the on-site visits. So it is a big issue. Then research staff health and availability. We had one study where a whole site, all the nurses caught COVID and were in the ICU themselves. So obviously that site was taken offline or just reduced staff because they have to quarantine because they were infected, even if they don't have COVID. So it's led to a lot of research staffing issues. And even within our own company, some staff are not comfortable in going on site, even if it's allowed. So we have to work through all those additional challenges, which weren't a problem pre-COVID. So it's certainly made COVID trials much more complex than any other non-COVID study. Then as well, other unique challenges for COVID programs, the unprecedented competition for sites. Over 4,900 studies started up within a year. So feasibility is probably 5 times the amount of effort as it would for any non-COVID trial. It's important to have a good relationship with the sites for them to even consider your protocol. Many have put in place a scientific evaluation committee, so you would hope that you have a very interesting molecule with strong scientific rationale or in the data to have a higher chance of it being accepted. And over time, the sites are saying, well, we have too many opportunities, not enough staff. They've been demanding higher investigator grants as well, which obviously puts pressure, on all of our sponsors. Then as well, there's no placebo arm typically in these studies, but there is a standard of care, which the challenge is it's constantly changing and also not consistent from country to country, which leads to challenges in how do you evaluate the information, can have an impact on the sample size calculation. And as well, over time, as new products are approved, the bar is raised as potentially more effective treatments are approved and added to the mix, which means that you then have to meet a higher standard. And then COVID-19 confirmation testing, will it fit between the window? Early on, there wasn't enough tests. The process for how you got tested was a huge problem. I'd say today that's less of an issue in that the testing programs have really increased across most countries, and that's less of an issue now. However, there's still potential supply issues and still getting the results back within the window so you can put them on the study. So it still can be a problem for enrolling patients on your trial. And now for specific vaccine trials, the availability of subjects for vaccine programs now, I'd say in the Western world, is becoming very problematic. And now you need to reach out to more of the third world countries, such as South Africa, such as Latin America and India, where you can find patients which don't have a chance of getting vaccinated for a period of time, that the subjects will participate on a clinical trial. And then if we want to look at the most important success factors for running a COVID trial, I'd say flexibility. You need to plan and replan every single week. So you have to have staff that is experienced and is flexible and not stuck in doing things just the way that they always done it in the past. Risk mitigation planning has never been more important. You need to have plans A, B, C, and D in your back pocket. I would recommend to all our sponsors to be more conservative and start with additional countries, sites, and resources than you think you'd need, because it's always a bit of a moving target. You don't know when patients are going to be in one country and then they get it, the curve goes down and then the patients dry up. Although it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon, but obviously you want to finish the study as soon as possible. Strong communication within the team and the sponsor, I'd say, is critical. Because, you're going to have probably 15 change orders before the end of the study because you're adding extra countries and sites and things are not planned it doesn't stick to the original plan. It's also important to have extra support for the sites and for the complicated, moderate, severe patient population in the hospitals. They're enrolling patients 24/7. Could be in the middle of the night, could be on the weekends. If a patient comes in and is available, they're going to try and enroll the patient. So you have to be able to answer their questions and make sure that, you don't lose a patient because you're not responsive. Also, we found it's important to have a data map, with the hot and cold zones within the hospitals. Where is that original source document? Is it in the hot zone and then you can't get it out? So then how do you get the information out? So it takes a little bit more logistics planning with your sites to make sure that, they can keep up to the demand of filling in the EDC data and we can keep cleaning the documents. So it's very important.
I'm going to just ask you to wrap up because we're actually...
Yeah, this is my last slide, actually.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So when disruptions occur, obviously sometimes you can't control it. So need to minimize the costs when no good alternatives are around. And then additional support for the sites, which could be add-on patient enrollment platforms, which is typical, could be advertising budgets, targeted web campaigns, and centralized recruitment and pre-screening services, which have popped up with some sponsors as well. Open additional country sites in less affected regions for the non-COVID studies, and really adopt virtual clinical trials, either through telemedicine, home visits, ePro, and wearables are really, I'd say, going forward is going to be critically important. And that's it.
Well, terrific. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for questions. Sam, is that correct? Because we need to keep on the agenda time frame.
It looks like Oscar is setting up backstage. But in the meanwhile, if anyone has a question, you can connect with Peter. You can also use our meeting scheduler to connect with him and his team as well to schedule any meetings or intros for the month of May. And again, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yep, we appreciate it, and say hello to our friends at Global Data. They're a terrific source of information. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lance.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
So let's all go to the final presentation before the panel discussion. Dr. Oscar, CMO of